Hey everyone, it's your favorite Kindle Vella fella, Gage Greenwood. A couple weeks ago, I had Callie Chase on where we talked about her series Bug and how she managed as a brand new author to take that series and have it just skyrocket up the charts on the Kindle Vella. But we decided to have her back on again because she also does editing, and we thought it would be nice to do a video where we answered your questions on how to self-edit your serial. So if you are interested in writing serial fiction, or if you already are writing serial fiction, we go over everything from formatting your serial to grammar issues and everything in between. I hope you find this video useful. If you do, please hit like and subscribe. A lot of cool stuff coming up about serial fiction, so make sure you hit that like and subscribe. And I'm also going to put links in the comments for her series Bug and my series Winter's Myth. Please come check it out. We really would appreciate it if you'd give our series a chance and see what you think. What's up, everybody? I'm here with Callie Chase, who was here last month as well, where we talked about her amazing series on the Kindle Vella, Bug. But what we didn't talk about is that she's also an editor. And do you want to talk a little bit about what you do with editing?
Sure. So thank you. First of all, I had so much fun. I had to come back. I invited myself back. So thank you for having me.
We should do this like once a month. We'll just answer people's questions and we'll pick a theme. And
I'd be so down. That's awesome. But yeah, so I love the fact that I get to write on Bella. Bug has been so much fun to write, and I'm so grateful for the readers and for all the reads. But I have like a day job, which is I'm a developmental editor, copy editor, and also a writing instructor. So I thought, a couple people have sent questions my way, or there's a lot of general questions that people had out there. And I thought, there's not one right way to do just about anything. So maybe like brain surgery, follow the rule, do it the one way that they recommend when you're doing that. But with writing, there's so many different ways to get to a great result that I thought a chat about some of these like really common questions, or a discussion where I can share, what, let's say in a classroom or client situation, I would teach someone, and real world, what you and I are doing on Vella, they're not always the same. You make compromises, but it could be something fun to kind of chat about and share with people. So hopefully I'll come up with some good information and guidance for people.
yeah, and that's what we're going to do today. So we asked some questions on the old Facebook and asked authors and people who people are aspiring, yes. And we got a bunch of great questions on self-editing and writing for serial fiction. And I'm going to read them to you, and we are going to answer them. So, what's just enough exposition for an episode? If you use a show not tell strategy to convey a setting, does that make it too difficult for a reader to imagine the setting?
Okay, so for this one, I think we should start with what you're actually doing, because I can give you like some teacher guidance, but like balancing exposition in an episode and show not tell, those are like super common questions. So Gage, your series has a lot of scenes where you need to describe what the characters are seeing. They're like running, they're this. How do you balance it? Like, do you have a rule of thumb for yourself, like word count or visually, or how do you find a comfortable balance?
Sort of. So it's a little bit difficult for me in this series because not only do I have to describe the setting to the reader, but I'm writing it from the perspective of characters who don't understand the setting.
Yeah.
And that becomes very difficult. Like, for example, they don't know what a car is, so they call them metal wagons. And you don't want to say metal wagon 1,000 times. They call the fence the wooden barricade. Like they don't have this understanding of what this stuff means. So that becomes very difficult to explain. But I think ultimately that's how you have to visualize your exposition, is how your characters are seeing it, and then give that to the readers. But you want to, if you're a person, even if you're in a strange environment, there's very particular things that are going to stick out to you. You don't need to describe that there's 100 trees around you, but you do want to describe that weird one with the branch that's, the kind of... So really, I just try and focus on not necessarily even what the reader needs to know, because the reader's going to be good at visualizing the setting themselves, but giving them just enough to do that and to kind of be that launch pad for them to understand it and to find those things that are going to stick out and make it a unique environment.
Honestly, I don't know that I would add too much to that. That's brilliant. That's the guidance that I try to follow. Like when I'm writing about, especially when, like, so my series has zombies in it. And so I want to evoke how scary they can be and like emotions and tension. But the temptation to fall into that like I'm telling the reader that the character is scared as opposed to showing it, because there are only so many ways, episode after episode, to show fear, to show, all these anticipatory kind of feelings. So that's, I think, what I do is I try to do exactly what you articulated, is focus on the world building that the reader needs to know to understand and state in the episode, whatever that is, whether it's creating that moment of tension or creating the atmosphere that, they feel situated in the scene. But don't overdo it, and balancing. So the question had kind of two parts, like what's enough exposition. I feel like if you're talking about exposition as like really true narrative explanation as opposed to dialogue and transition words like that, I like to also gut check and just like look at a page. So if I'm writing, a 2,500 word episode, I know that that first page, if I'm looking at it visually, is a wall of text with no dialogue, no internal thoughts, nothing to really break that up. Then I'm always gut checking. It can be hard because if you have a character, especially for me early on in the series when I had individual characters kind of alone in a scene, or I wrote one recently where I had a character, a non-human character, a human character in non-human form, and he was alone for. My intention was to have him alone for the entire episode, and I realized really quickly as I was writing it that, like, without being able to make it too artificial, like having him constantly thinking to himself, it's really hard to write an engaging episode with one character doesn't engage with any other human being or character that can articulate something. So I ended up changing the entire episode just to give it, thinking about how the reader's experience of it was going to be. Like, as much as I knew what I wanted to accomplish with that exposition, I felt like it just went too slow and, bogged things down. So I tried to show the scene, not tell very much, because in that one head, that one POV, have that character looking around telling the reader, like, yeah, this is how I feel, or this is what's going on. And I ended up bringing an entirely different action point into the middle of that scene, so that at least if page one of the episode didn't have a lot of active dialogue and things going on with interchanges between characters, at least I could break up the paragraphs, make them look a little bit shorter. And I knew I was building towards someone else coming into that scene. And I think that differs, especially in Vella episodic writing, as opposed to in a novel, because I think in a novel you do have more time and space to develop without being quite as worried. But it's still a technique a lot of writers I've worked with have told me they do, is they just think about that reader on their shoulder every page. Are they seeing a wall of text, or is it something that even visually looks like they can pretty quickly get through? So what do you think? Do we nail this one? Are we good?
I think we nailed that one. Another thing that's interesting for me is that describing characters, I almost don't at all. Especially in Winter's Myths, because I want Winter and his daughters to be kind of mysterious to the reader, and I want them to kind of picture them how they want to picture them, because they're supposed to be kind of strange and difficult to understand. And then for them, when I'm writing from their viewpoint, they're so terrified of humans that they see a human as a human. Like, it's just... so they don't really get these big descriptors of the characters they're seeing either. And I do that intentionally. So I think that's really a big part of it too, is just picturing how your character is seeing it.
I love that, because I love giving the reader the chance to sort of create the character for themselves in their head based on what they know and not based on what you're sort of telling them is there.
Yeah,
that way it's open to a little bit of interpretation. And some people are like, I need to know, is it like black hair? Is it wooded? But I think it's cool too to give, especially in serial fiction, we don't have a book cover necessarily that's going to convey what all the characters look like to sell that story. So yeah, go for it. Don't even give them names. Just be like, all right, the dad's running. No, I'm kidding. Name them. but you can pare back those details.
And if you name them things like violin and candlestick, you will get a lot of people messaging you asking about it.
Why, Gage?
I answered that, by the way. That got answered in the episode that dropped today.
Yay! What's the episode? Can you tell us the episode number too of that so people know, like, it's coming? Episode.
It's not till episode 23. I've hinted at it quite a bit before, and you can figure it out much earlier, but you'd have to do some Google searching to understand. But it gives a full answer in episode 23.
Excellent teaser. We're all going to race now through to get to episode 23 so we understand. We'll know why the name, but we still won't know the hair color.
Yes. All right, so this next question comes from our buddy Chris, he writes an awesome series called Humans Are Scary, by the way, and I highly recommend it. It's so wonderful, and what I really love about Chris on his social media, if you want to follow him, is he often talks from the perspective of his character Borgu, who is very strange, and he'll often talk from that perspective. Borgu wants you to read the new chapter and things like that, and he does that in this question too. So, in episode 1 of Humans Are Scary, Buddy's baby daddy is run over by a truck. I'm struggling to figure out if I should have used the past tense of lay or lie. Borgu is struggling with the grammar in the situation as well. Borgu finds himself on the road, lay a rabbit, twitching and convulsing. Does the rabbit lay there, or is he laid there because the truck is responsible for putting him there?
Okay, at this point in the conversation, I need to bring out some textbooks and bore people. No, it's not going to be boring at all. So grammar and things like that, I think it is definitely challenging. The first issue, like when I teach copy editing, I tell people who want to copy edit professionally is the best thing you can do is know what you don't know and start to spot these issues. So just the fact that Chris knows that there is a difference between lay and lie, and it depends, in part on the usage and the subject of that sentence. He's already probably vastly far ahead in terms of self-editing than a lot of people would be. So I can tell you the answer, but I also want to provide some tools so that people can learn and look these things up for themselves, demystifying, like, how do I know when I'm talking about my own work as opposed to what Borgu is struggling with? So do you care if I do a shameless plug for 2 textbooks? They're not, I haven't written them, so it's not a shameless plug for myself, but they're books that I think are super helpful.
Yeah.
Is that cool? Of course. Okay, so I love this book.
And I'll put a link in the description to both of them, by the way.
Perfect. So Helen Hart is a truly genius, #1 New York Times bestselling author. She's written a teeny tiny volume, and it's called Got Style, a fiction writer's companion. It's very inexpensive, and honestly, even teaching copy editing, I rely on this thing all the time. I go back. She uses a very, I want to say accessible. Like, you can just open the book to the issue that you're having as you're writing and think, yeah, this makes sense in context. I'm with you. Whereas, way up on my shelves here, I have other copy editing textbooks, Chicago Manual of Style. Unless you're already sort of like a practitioner, you're not going to probably start teaching yourself these things using CMOS or, the giant book. I also use the best punctuation book, period. I also am sucker for puns, and that's so clever, I can't handle it. So those are 2 books that I keep literally handy because when I'm working and I have a quick question, I know they're really easy to use and find answers to. Obviously, also Chicago Manual Style, either online or the bound book. And then I also love the Copy Editor's Handbook, the 4th edition. So all these are inexpensive things people can read, buy, and use as they need to. The quickest answer to this question, though, is there is a difference. It depends on who the subject of that sentence is. So I'll try to make it simple without actually visually showing it. Unless, Gage, do you want to get really tricky? We can share screens and I can actually write the sentence out. But it's probably easier to just say, in this situation where the sentence is, on the road, lay a rabbit twitching. So because someone... definitely understand the question. The truck hit the rabbit, but the truck didn't it can't lay a rabbit down. It's not actually doing that. What's really happening in this scene is the rabbit is lying in the road twitching. So the rabbit is the subject of that action. It's like, I fell asleep. The rabbit sleeps. The rabbit lies. The rabbit dies. So it would be in that case, lie, a rabbit twitching. And it feels a little awkward. It is correct. And, again, is a reader going to stop reading because it says a rabbit lay twitching? A few of your grammar nerds probably would and probably would be confused. But I would say this is a great question to kind of earmark for yourself. There are those trigger words, and I like to use a style sheet for myself. I always spell certain things wrong, and some of them I've just accepted I always will, but I have them in a list, and I always just kind of search and replace those words in a document when I'm writing. And so lay in line might be one that people are just like, okay, I'm going to get myself some resources. I'm going to mark this for later. And worst case, phone a friend. Like there's lots of groups and people you can reach out to ask as you're writing for something that specific. But great question. Now we have the answer and the tools, and hopefully Borgo is going to not feel good about the rabbit, but feel good about the question.
Borgo doesn't like humans either, so I wonder if this softened him a little bit. He's appreciative to you, and now he likes humans.
There you go. I'll take that good karma.
Okay, next question. How to write a strong hook, the different types of cliffhangers, and how to pull them off.
Yeah, so okay, let's punt this one to you. So there's like 3 parts here. How to write a strong hook, what are different cliffhangers, and then execution of those things. So what would you say for yourself in your series as you're writing? Let's talk about hooks. What have you done that you think makes a hook a strong hook for the reader?
I'll tell you, when I started publishing this, the very beginning of my series was from the original novel I had written. And it has that little bit of a question at the end of the first episodes, but it's not like a huge cliffhanger. And as I've gone, I've improved that. And one thing that I always do for myself is I say, okay, this is a great point where it's going to leave the reader with questions. And then I bring it back like 2 or 3 sentences. And I ask myself if that works even better. It doesn't always, but sometimes it does. Let's say for a scenario, you have a couple and the woman is worried that her boyfriend is cheating, so she grabs his phone and then sees like text messages from an ex-girlfriend, right? This is a pretty generic story here, but I'm just using it as an example. You might want to add some emotion there and her reaction to it, and then her reading the messages. But I think just ending it on name on the phone, and then that drops right there. It's almost like sometimes you want to go right for the middle of like the rising action. You know what I mean? Like just cut it off right there.
I love that, and I totally agree. Like I feel like if you think about the hook as like a promise to the reader that there's a lot more good stuff to come, you just have to keep going. That can help. For me, I find that it's really hard to end an episode on a hook with like what I would consider a strong hook until I'm actually writing it, because like I like to bookend my episodes with, so the hook is what starts them reading. Like you open up the episode and like, oh wait, yeah, action, what's happening? Where did we leave off? Like someone's running. And then in order to build from that active opening to a hook, I really need the whole episode to do that and figure that out for myself. And I think your suggestion is brilliant. Like, what is that something, whatever it is? It doesn't like, I feel like calling them cliffhangers is almost too dramatic. It can be as little as, and it's not small, but your example is perfect. Like, that's it. That's the hook. That's the moment. Yeah. I think it's poetic, beautiful. And the execution, I think maybe we touched on that just by knowing that when you start writing that particular episode, for myself, I always kind of try to follow that triangle arc in my head where I start active. So I'm not starting static or low. I'm starting maybe I should like use the visual high. Like I start high, go higher, and then bring the reader back down. And I can't really know what those 2 anchor points are until I'm in the episode, but I'm always trying to write from the beginning to the end, knowing those really important like hook points. And then everything in between is the crazy ride that gets you there in 1,500 words or 22,000 words, whatever you're writing.
Another thing you can do to, I think, really get the reader, and you have to do this very carefully because it can go wrong and you can really annoy the reader. I will leave a cliffhanger with Winter and his daughters, and then the next episode is about somebody else. So you don't get that answer from Winter until a couple episodes later. And like I said, you want to be careful with that. You don't want to drag it out too much. They will get very angry at you. But
I love that. I love that. Especially if you have a big cast. That really works.
All right. You ready for the next one?
Yeah.
Okay. What tools do you use for editing? Is there a best of the best?
Yeah, so I think we should definitely both answer this because we're both, doing it as we go. And obviously my tools might be a bit different from others, like definitely the books. And I have my own personal style sheet, so I know that there are things I do wrong and I'm looking for that. I recommend these two books to everyone if you can invest. I think this one is like $9-10. This one is a little bit more, but it's still very affordable and practical. People use all kinds of online tools. I don't because I honestly I have I have so many subscriptions to so many things that to me like I hope that I know enough that like pro writing aid works for a ton of people, but I haven't tried it, so I can't speak to it. I do rely on some of the automated tools in Scrivener and Word, especially things like spelling and things like that, and basic grammar stuff. But for the most part, I think the best self-editing tool is reading other people's work and getting practice seeing things that are done incorrectly. And it can be really, really tough to do if you don't know what you don't know until unfortunately someone's pointed it out to you. But starting to really read craft books and figuring out that, oh, dangling modifiers are a thing. And I do them anyway. Like once you know what the rules are, you can selectively break them. It's just knowing that balance, I think, between what's going to break the reading experience for the reader versus just be technically incorrect, but it works and we're going with it, which I hate to admit that I do, but I totally compromise on some of the rules sometimes.
Oh, I think you have to. I'd just like 2 weeks ago, the person who edits for me pointed out that I had a sentence that I was using a semicolon incorrectly. And I looked at it and I said, yeah, I am. And I was like, the alternative makes the sentence so much uglier. And like I didn't realize it when I did it, but then when I looked at it, I was like, wow. I said, what do you suggest I change this to? And then she was like, actually, I guess you're right. It probably, even though it's technically incorrect, it flows better the way you have it. And I think that sometimes you have to be able to break the grammar rules, but you have to know the grammar rules to know which ones are okay to break and why,
Yeah. And that's the hard part because I don't think either of us are saying like, yeah, do what you want,
right,
as long as it reads well. But selectively, saying, okay, what am I think even pro editors, copy editors, and developmental story editors, you make compromises all the time because it's a matter of technical perfection, which is never going to exist in language. And okay, this is a clear, effective product for the reader. That's always the goal. If they don't stop reading, you're probably doing it okay.
Yeah.
But other tools. So other than your editor, is there anything else you would recommend to folks to, let's say they're not hiring an editor and they're really trying to DIY? Is there anything else you're using or you've heard about that might work for folks?
Again, I agree with you. I'm with you. I don't use Pro Writing Aid or Grammarly or any of those things, but I do know a lot of people stand behind them, so they're certainly worth checking out if you can. And then always just fresh eyes, if you have that person who can help you is always good. But I know we're talking about self-editing here. So also like reading it out loud, I think is very good to just get you out of that, you know what it says. But if you say it out loud, then you know how the reader is going to hear it. And then I do use online tools. Like I go to Grammar Girl for help a lot. I think she's got, she's got the answers a lot. So things like that. So yeah, I posted in my other video the other day that I'm working on a $0 budget. So find those free resources because they're there. Just make sure they're credible ones, like Grammar Girl. I think that's a good one.
Exactly, Grammar Girl, and even the Chicago Manual of Style, which is kind of a editing Bible for fiction. They have a free online blog, and frequently, if you just sort of Google a question and look for CMOS, the answer will come up. Someone else has asked it, the community has answered, and you're right. Like, make sure it's from a good source that you would rely on. But there is a lot out there that's free if you know the question to ask. Cool.
All right, ready for the next one?
Moving on.
If you enjoy planning using the Save the Cat structure, with, say, 80,000 words. How would you fit an episodic structure in there? Is each scene an episode? Is it better to organize in episodes rather than scenes? I'm going to let you answer that because I am a pantser.
Okay, but I also really do want to know how you've structured, because you started from a novel too, right? So you initially had a novel and then you moved into breaking it into episodes. So, okay, I'll try to be brief because novel structure is literally one of my all-time favorite things. And so I could spend a whole entire hour going through, like, once you see structure and you know how to identify the parts, you, at least for me, like, I feel like the puzzle of how a book works is completely demystified. Like, if you know beginning, middle, and end, you're already halfway there. You just need to know that, like, the beginning of your book sets up. And that's, so, like, you can call it Save the Cat, but I prefer that's like someone's book title and that's like a brand. The 3-act structure is one of the oldest, most commonly referred to structures for novel. There's also the hero's journey, which is literally just a more highly refined step through the 3-act structure. Like, the steps are more refined. But whatever, don't worry about all the names and the labels. If you're trying to focus on structuring the series, the thing you need to know is beginning, middle, and end are your primary parts. When, like, for example, with Bog, I don't know the end point of my word count, but I do know how my story will end. So I kind of think of it as like the starting point, and then all these quests in the middle, and then I know where it's going to end up. So structurally, I have in my head those 3 acts, big picture. But then on a micro level, on an episodic level, every episode has a beginning, middle, and end too. And so going back just to the specific question, like, okay, so you enjoy planning. Let's just set it out there that you know you're going to write about 80,000 words in your series. So how would you fit 80,000 words of what might otherwise be a novel into an episodic structure? So what I would do is remember that books are different from series. A book is like a movie where you're going to sit down and you're going to watch the whole thing unfold in one setting and be complete. Whereas, like, Vella or episodic fiction is like a TV show. And it's not like a sitcom where you see the same thing over and over each week, but in different scenarios. But think of like one with a life cycle, like Sopranos or The Witcher, whatever it is that tells a story over a long period of time. So with episodic fiction, you're really going to start at one point and build to an end point in the same way. But now you're using sort of those micro sections, which are our episodes, to accomplish a lot more, a lot faster. So each scene probably isn't an episode. Every episode could be just one scene. But I think you can also have multiple episodes in one scene. So really thinking for yourself, like, structurally about what the words mean that we're using. Like, so for me, an episode is a single moment where I have built tension around a certain problem and resolved it to a point that leads to the next problem and resolution. So for example, if you don't mind if I use one example from Bog, like, so right now I'm at the point in the series where the cast is spread out all over, and there will be longer scenes where, there's a horde that has descended on the survivors in this particular location, and they're on a studio lot for where, like, a famous TV show, famous in the book, it's not real, TV show is filmed, and so we've got some people there, and so the scene of fighting these zombies in this one particular location actually spans 3 or 4 episodes. Structurally, the way I broke it out was by sort of the emotional components. Like, the first part of the scene, there's a critical issue with a character, and that comes to the forefront and really shapes the movement of the fight or of where the people are in the scene. And then I stop it at a point where it's like, oh crap, somebody did this and now they've made it worse for everybody else, that kind of thing. So I think when you're planning, if you're a planner for your episodes, and even if you're not, you can kind of do this one by one as you go. But just thinking about structure, long-term and short-term, is what's happening. Rising tension, sustaining tension, falling tension, putting that hook in there. And not thinking so much, how am I going to take this giant story and just slice and dice it so it fits into like less than 5,000 words, because that's all Vella allows at this moment, you know. Does that fit with sort of like, because you've had that experience, right? You took your novel and now you've made it episodic. So how does that track with what you're actually doing?
Yeah, pretty much. I think a great resource for people who are wanting to explore episodic fiction more in their writing, besides going to episodic fiction itself, like reading stories on Vella, is to read comic books, because that's what they do. That's what they are. That's what they've been doing for decades. And one thing that I think that you'll see when you start reading comic books, especially now, because the industry works in a way where they want an overarching storyline that goes from point A to point B over like 10 years, but they want to sell graphic novels. So they want a complete story being told in comic book 1 through like 10, sometimes even just 1 through 6. So there's these like smaller arcs. And that's a smaller arc leads to the next smaller arc, leads to the next smaller arc. And all of that is in this overarching big story that ends up being in a compendium. And that, for comic books, is all about selling. It's all about selling it as individual issues, then as graphic novels, then as compendiums. But it is a good structure, I think, when you're planning out how to turn, like, if you already have a novel, how to turn that into episodic fiction. And for me, the way that it's working for me is it's making it a way longer series in a good way, because what I'm writing right now derailed my novel completely. But it's all going to go back to where the novel ends. It's just I've made the world bigger, I've made the characters bigger, and I've made the story bigger by making smaller storylines mixed in there. Or there's a great quote that I heard once from the guy who wrote the screenplay for Requiem for a Dream. That was based on a book, and he said when he was writing the screenplay, he said, when people write tragedies, they write a person on a roller coaster ride that ends with them hitting a wall. I wanted to write a story where they hit the wall in the first minute and then reversed and kept hitting the wall for an hour and a half. And I think that's a good way to look at your story as well, is just keep making them hit that wall and then trying to find a way to reverse it and bring them around.
Those are brilliant, seriously brilliant analogies. I totally love that. That's a brilliant way to see it. See, we're good. I wish we could high five. That's I love it. Hopefully that's helpful too to people who are like, what is the hero's journey? Well, don't worry about it. Read a comic book. You got it. You got this.
Yeah, that's the thing, is like, because I'm an avid reader. I read a lot of books every year, quite a ridiculous amount. But I also read a ton of comic books. And, you know, a lot of people look at comic books as like not literary, but there's a lot of great stuff out there, and you can learn a lot from comic books, especially in episodic fiction. I think there's the structuring is just exactly how they do it.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And comic books are fun. There's awesome art.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, where are we next on this list? During the review process, what are some things that you would look for that are different from a novel? Do you think about how text will appear in the reader because it's smaller horizontally or vertically? Is there enough of a cliffhanger to make you want to read the next episode? If the most successful novelist in the world took a book and plopped it into serialized fiction format, would it still be a good read? Is there too much dialogue? Not enough narration? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there.
Yes. Yeah. But I think we've touched on almost all these aspects already. Like, my 2 cents worth is 100% for me. I always look at how the text appears to the reader, knowing, you know, how it's going to look in Vella. Early on in my episodes, I was probably less sensitive to that fact than I am now. And I write much shorter paragraphs. I do have to catch myself sometimes and say, like, you don't have to have 10 one-sentence paragraphs. People will continue through for a full-size paragraph on Vella. But I'm reading on Vella too, and I immediately notice those things for myself when I'm in someone else's series. And I'm like, wow, this would have been so much easier for me to read if it were 2 paragraphs instead of 1 big one. So those visual clues, without a doubt. But I don't think that's like a bad thing. I honestly think if you're interested in keeping that pace brisk for your readers, so they're pushing through, page by page and episode by episode, being sensitive to all these issues. Like, how does it look? Do I have a good, breakdown between active scene where something's happening right now and narrative where I'm explaining, getting people from point A to point B? I definitely don't think the most successful novel in the world, like as a book, just broken up into bits, would necessarily fit and be a successful novella. Anything can happen. Believe me, there's so many ways to do this right. But I would be concerned for myself trying to do that. That's why I had the same experience, Gage, that you said you had with your novel. Like, Bugs started out as a 68,000 word novel that was a mess, and it still had everything in it that I loved, the zombies and the characters and like the purpose of the story, but structurally it didn't work at all. And now it's so much bigger and it's paced so much better and the characters are so much cooler because I'm thinking about them, not with the long arc that fits one work product sort of vision, but that comic book thing where they're like, okay, we're just going to keep them going here, all the little bits and pieces. But what do you think about all of this? Because I know you've had scenes too where like your characters aren't speaking to each other. They're communicating, but they're not speaking. So like, how do all these things show up in your series?
Yeah, I I tend to write for a quick reading experience in general, even when I'm writing in novel form. That's just my pacing. That's just my style. And I actually need to stop myself from doing that because, yes, I think it's good to write fast-paced and in a way where the reader can scroll quickly. But if it's too much, then they're not getting enough. And I think that you need to balance that out. I think it's the same way when you're looking at sentence structuring. If you write like a 3-word sentence, and then your next one's a 3-word sentence, your next one's a 3, that's just like this weird beat. But if you like mix that up, it has this better, what's the word I'm looking for? Not syntax, but better, I don't know, a better flow to it. It just sounds better when you're reading it in your head that there's a shorter sentence than a longer sentence. And I think it's good to do that with your paragraphs too. Just make it different. And so the eye is continuously catching the page. Like if you're writing one sentence, that has a almost boring flow to it. Whereas if you're mixing it up and spreading it all around, then it's better. It is difficult with Winter's Myths because they don't talk a lot. They tap to each other. They speak in this tapping language. But there's also a lot of action, so you can kind of fill in with like, okay, this paragraph was a bit long. Boom, next one is quick, and then just kind of break it up.
Break it up. And how long, Gage, is your average episode length?
I write very short episodes. In between 1,000 and 2,000 words. Some of them are even shorter. I have a couple 600-word episodes on there, and then a couple that go a little longer, like to 25. And I think that's a good thing to do too, is mix that up a little bit. I'm a little bit curious to see, as more readers go to the platform, how that works. I don't want readers to see a 600-word episode and feel ripped off. And I don't want to see a reader see a 5,000-word episode and feel like they don't want to pay for it. And I'm curious to see how that translates. And I think, it's always going to come down to the quality of the story, whether they move forward. But I do think that will play some kind of factor in people's decision-making. We'll see how that goes as we go.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because I know other platforms also sort of structure their series in different ways. Like when I first thought about putting Bug on, I thought, well, if I'm writing an average of 1,500 words, when I'm writing a novel, I would consider 1,500 words like the short end of a single scene. Like that's kind of my scene goal, to write to that for a single, start to finish thing. And I literally was thinking, like, am I going to be able to put like 3 and 4 scenes in one episode? Am I going to make them short? Like, I've read serialized fiction. I haven't seen this on Vella, but on other platforms where you can see a 2,000-word episode and you're following literally 4 different scenes in that one episode. And so I think in some ways it's really great that Vella is early days because we can trial it and see what works genre specific too. Like I found for myself, I was really like, I can bang out 1,500 words, sure. And then it's like, yeah, but that's almost not enough to really convey everything I want to convey. And especially if you're running from zombies, or if there's no zombie in the scene and there's other action, because the zombies are in another episode, but it didn't feel like enough. So my average episode length, I think, is like 2,800 to 3,200, which sounds like ridiculously long, but I think it goes by fast when you're like, oh yeah, I've got like 10 different characters that people might be following, all these different scenes going on. And I got to reorient people. I got to remind you, like, yeah, you haven't seen this person in 3 episodes. Where were they? But it's fun to hear like different ways, because I honestly, I think it'd be super cool. I should try throwing in like a 600 or 700 episode or something just random and dramatic happens. And as long as there's a reason that it's short, fantastic.
Yeah, my short ones tend to be the actual Winter's myths. So it's the stories that he's telling his kids. And to me, that makes sense a little bit that those are going to be a little shorter, because he's still worried about the world around him. So he's just trying to tell them a quick story. You know what I mean?
And I think the reader education piece of like feeling ripped off is like, that's why I think in a way it's really great that right now Vella is priced based on the word count, because then people will know like, oh, I paid this many tokens for this episode, but this one's only this many, and it was shorter. And then hopefully it makes sense to the readers, crossing our fingers.
Well, I believe Audrey Carlin said online that she writes, her sweet spot is 2,500 to 3,100 or 3,200, and she's doing quite well. So I think she probably has a good eye for that.
That's probably a great line. I would follow Audrey's advice.
I would follow Audrey's advice on anything.
Absolutely.
She could call me and give me parenting advice, and I'd be like, "Yep, I'm gonna do it." Yeah. Okay, so I got one last question. Glue words. I always get dinged for having too many, according to Pro Writing Aid. I can't seem to get rid of them because they're so darn sticky. What do we do? Oh, how do we avoid them in a way that won't ruin the structure of a sentence?
All right.
What's
you want to field this together? Oh, well, I think a glue word is like and, but, then, when you've got like, so I'm just going to put the teacher hat on and go with it for a second. I apologize if I sound like a talking head, but so one of my pet peeves as an editor and writing instructor is seeing way too many actions in one sentence. Like if you look back at a single sentence and you see 3 or 4 action words like jumping, thinking, reaching, even things like filtering words like started to turn or turn to do something, like really, I think a good function of self-editing is starting to have that critical eye for every, not just the impact that your words have, but every word. Like, am I writing and forcing the reader to think back and forth? Like, we're jumping, we're running, we're this. So varying your sentence structure can really help. So put that introductory clause where you're like, holding on to, should we pick on Borgu since Chris gave us that really good name to use, like his little goblin? Like Borgu, and this is not at all what happened to them. I'm just going to pick on the character. Borgu, holding the bunny close to his chest, ran out into the road after the truck. Structuring, a clause so that you're not always like subject, verb in a long list of and this, then that, and also this, while this. Limiting those action words to 2 or 3 at most. Even your adjectives, like if your adjectives convey movement and action, it can feel a little bit whiplashy, and you'll find yourself, I think, relying more on those glue words when multiple things are happening. Don't be afraid. We are not trying to be, the Great Gatsby. We're not trying to necessarily be literary. We want to be beautiful and have our writer's voice, but we also do want the reader to be able to follow it. And too much action, also inverting cause and effect, like really make it simple for the reader to follow that linear action. Like one of the things I get frustrated about and always comment on when I'm editing is if you're using the words before and after in a sentence, really ask yourself if you are using them because you are conveying a time sequence or a chronology of that character's action or thought that's clear to the reader. Like, there's no real reason to tell us the story. Like, he did this just before he did this. It's like, wait, so what is he doing right now? That's the reader reaction. those I think are glue words. So like before and while. And the way I would reduce them is really critically look at, am I really stuck in this subject verb, load up the adjective structure in my writing voice? Or can I mix that up a little bit? Sentence fragments, if you're in grade school, are a terrible thing. I use them. If they're impactful and clear, deep POV where it sounds like the character speaking, that's a good way to break up, some of those glue words and just give us the kind of heart of the sentence without making the reader work through a list every single page of. That's kind of like my 2 cents, plus my editorial pet peeve. But again, opinion, try it, play with it. There's many ways to do that. But if you find yourself locked into any one voice or any one technique, varying it up is probably the solution to not getting dinged by your pro writing aid tools or whatever it is that readers are like, oh, this is too long, blah, blah, blah. What about you, Gage? How do you develop that writer's voice and make things flow?
I struggle with that a lot in particular in this story because it's very action packed, which is not necessarily I've always written horror and I write like a more subtle, slow, creepy horror. So I don't usually have those like big action-packed scenes, which is what I'm writing now. And not only am I writing that, but I have a lot of characters doing a lot of things at once. So I struggle with that, and I make silly mistakes. The other day, I had an episode that I was about to send to my editor, and realized that I forgot about the dog. Like, where was he during all this? So then I had to go back and fix it because I just forgot about the dog. So I think for me, I get to a place a lot where it's not necessarily a glue word problem, but it's just like he did this, she did this, she did this, and then I have to go back and like rework that in a way where when he's doing this, something else is happening over there that he can't see, but he can like hear it. You know what I mean? Like meanwhile there was, you know what I mean? And I think you can do that in a way where without using meanwhile, I wouldn't use that. But so as he's, fighting one guy, behind him a gunshot went off, or in my world it's a boom weapon shot because he doesn't know what a gun is. But
I love it. Oh my gosh, Gage. I'm just gonna slip boom weapon into bug now because that's so brilliant. I love it. Well, but what you're saying is exactly like, I think saying it without using the same term necessarily is like you're using all the senses, so if you're showing and not telling, that also helps you avoid kind of getting into that repetitive groove of just telling, this is happening, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling, all those things. And remembering your characters are like 360. So they're going to be looking down, they're going to be feeling stuff inside, outside. It's trial and error, and it's also not really rushing through your drafts, write it, let it sit, and then go back to it and really think about the impact of like, don't worry about the episode as a whole, like paragraph by paragraph. Is this precise, clear, readable, correct?
Yeah, I think if you're writing something that's like actiony, and I don't mean action necessarily as like an action movie punching and stuff like that, but even like an action scene with a couple or whatever, there's something happens in real life. This is what happens. Something happens to you, you feel it, and then you react to it. And those happen in that order. So if he's yelling at her and she's yelling at him, somewhere in there's going to be some emotion that needs to come out. So
that's brilliant. Seriously, that's a brilliant way to describe it. Because if you remember to just kind of gut check your characters and say, okay, I just have this back and forth, but that's something I frequently forget. And I'm just trying to go, and my editor who helps me with Bug says the same thing. Like, they're not feeling anything. Like, this is really crazy what just happened. Like, nobody paused to be like, what the heck? You know what I mean? So I totally love that. That's a perfect way of articulating it, I think.
All right. Well, that is the end of the questions for today. So we hope we were helpful to everyone. Yeah.
We solved everyone's problems.
We solved everyone's problem in the whole world, actually. Peace on earth.
World peace. You're welcome.
You can send us thank you cards.
Right.
We hope that you enjoyed it, and we hope that your serials are going well if you are writing one, and if you're planning on writing one, we hope it does go well. And check out Bug. It's awesome. I said to Callie the other day that holidays are great and all, but new bug day when a new episode releases is my favorite day of the week.
Thank you.
And feel free to check out Winter's Myths as well if I haven't said that enough to you. And hit like and subscribe if you found this helpful, which you did. And I think that's a great idea. If you're into it, we should do this once in a while. Just get together and we'll pick like a theme. Maybe we'll have a day where we go over how to write a good villain, and we'll answer your questions and we'll go from there.
I love it. Thanks, Gage. This has been so fun.
Thank you. It was awesome. So I'll put a link in the description to Bug and to Callie Chase's pages so you can follow her. And we'll see you next week. Thank you.
That's good.